posted August 12th, 3:14 a.m. I swear the woods behind Split Tooth whispered my name last night, and if I stop writing before the end, it's because something out there finally answered. You're listening to ASMR 400 for Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I grew up near the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, and folks around there will tell you the woods are older than time and hungrier than any man. And when you hike those ridges with the fog rolling low across the holler, it feels like you're walking through something alive and listening back at you, and that was always the way. My daddy put it that the woods were listening, and if you didn't respect them, they would remember your voice and call you back someday. The trail I'm talking about is an old logging path that branches off from the North Fork Mountain Trail. It doesn't have a name on the maps, and I never found it listed in any ranger log. But every local kid who grew up within 50 miles has heard about it. They call it the Split Tooth because halfway down you come across a rock formation shaped like a busted jaw with one long crooked stone standing like a fang, and the story goes that men disappeared there back when the timber companies were running roughshod through the hills and hauling out chestnut and oak with mule teams, dynamite blasting the ridges, and no matter how much steel and firepower they had, the forest always took more than its share of blood. When I was 17, I decided to go see it for myself, because that's what you do when you're young and stupid and think the warnings are just meant to scare you off a good adventure. I had a buddy named Cody who felt the same, and we packed light, just a couple of cans of beans, a cheap Walmart tent, and one of those flashlights with a beam so weak you had to shake it every half hour to keep it alive. And we set out in the early morning mist, following the trailhead marker where the official path runs clean and open with yellow blazes on the tree stand. That morning was damp and smelled like pine tar, and wetter than every step deeper into the hollow made the birds quieter, like they were keeping their distance from us. And by noon the sun broke through in slanted beams that looked painted on the ground. But the deeper we went, the harder it was to tell east from west, because the trail narrowed and the trees closed over us. And then we saw it, the Split Tooth, standing tall and crooked like a rotten jawbone half buried in the ridge linen. Oh, the thing about the rock was not just the shape, but the way the light bent around it. It should have been lit from the side, with the noon sun coming down at an angle, but instead the stone looked darker than the trees around it, as if it was swallowing the light, and the air was cooler to so cold we could see our breath even though it was July. And I remember Cody looking at me with his mouth open like he wanted to speak but couldn't, and I felt that same weight in my chest, like when you walk into a church at midnight. No, you're not supposed to be there. Set the tent up a few yards away, because we thought it would be funny to camp near the tooth and brag about it later. And when the night fell, it came down fast, like somebody dropped a curtain, and the woods outside our little lantern glow went black and quiet, and then came alive again. But not with normal sounds. There were no crickets, no owls, no rustle of deer moving through brush. Instead, it was a low shifting hum, like a voice too deep to belong to any man. It seemed to circle our tent, never coming close, but never leaving either. He lay there with my heart pounding so hard I thought it would tear through my ribs. And Cody whispered that he could see shadows moving against the tent wall, even though the lantern was off and there was no moon, and when I looked I saw them two long shapes, sliding like smoke across the canvas, bending and curling as if they were peering down at us from above, and I wanted to bolt out of the tent and run. But my legs wouldn't answer me. It felt like the whole forest was pressing a hand down on my chest at me time. In the small hours I heard the zipper move slow and steady, like fingers tugging at it from the outside, and I turned my head and saw Cody staring wide-eyed, frozen stiff, while the flap shook and pulled, and finally opened an inch, and I swear to you, I saw an eye in that gap, not an animal eye, not human either. It was wide and wet like polished stone, glistening with its own dull glow, and it looked at me, not at Cody, not at the ground, but at me as if it had been waiting when dawn came. The flap was closed tight again, and the ground outside the tent was smooth as if nothing had touched it, and Cody swore it was a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't, because I could still feel the cold weight of that gaze pressing between my eyes. And the part that shook me worse than anything was that the eye had looked familiar, like something I'd seen once before in my own reflection, when I was younger, standing in the dark of my daddy's barn, where no light should have been at all, broke camp without talking much and hiked back toward the trailhead. But the woods didn't look the same anymore. The trees seemed taller and leaned closer, the path narrower and longer than before. It took us twice as long to reach the open clearing. The official blazes picked up again, and when we finally stumbled out into the ranger lot, I felt the warmth of the sun on my face, like I'd been underwater for hours, gasping for air. I told myself I wouldn't go back, and I meant it. I swear I did, but the thing about the split tooth is once you see it doesn't let you go on for years afterward. I would wake at night and swear I heard that low hum just beyond my window, and sometimes I would catch a glimpse in the mirror, a flash of that same wet stone eye watching me from inside my own reflection. I think that was the beginning of it, the first hook set deep in my chest, dragging me back toward the forest no matter how hard I fought. It was 5 years later when the call came back, and I don't mean a voice on the phone or a letter in the mailbox. I mean the hum, that same low droning hum that slid under the floorboards and through the window cracks and into my head when I tried to sleep, and I had thought I left it behind at 17, but it stayed like a splinter. You can't dig out, and when I turned 22, it came alive again, louder than ever. I knew what it wanted. He had tried to make a life outside the mountains. I had a job down in Charleston, stocking shelves overnight at a grocery store. I had a girlfriend who liked to talk about moving to the coast. I had plans, I thought, but every night the dreams got worse, and I would see that eye again, wide, wet like polished river stone, and I'd wake up sweating so hard the sheets stuck to me. No matter how loud I played the radio or how much beer I put down my throat, the hum never left. It just waited until I was quiet enough to hear it. Agonal night, I got in my truck. Without even meaning to, it felt like my hands weren't mine gripping the wheel, and the road signs blurred by as I headed north back toward the Monongahela. And every mile closer the air felt heavier, and the hum got clearer, not coming from the speakers, not from outside the truck, but from inside my bones, like my ribs were singing along with it. And when I reached the old gravel lot where the trailhead begins, I killed the engine and realized my legs were Already swinging out the door before I even thought about it, Woods greeted me like an old friend. An old enemy all at once, the smell of wet pine, the sound of water trickling somewhere unseen. Mist curling low over the ground, and the deeper I walked, the more the forest closed behind me, until it felt like the path itself was swallowing me whole, and I should have turned back. I should have, but turning back wasn't an option anymore because the hum was pulling me forward step after step like a chain hooked into my chest, dragging me to where it wanted me. Came upon the split tooth in less time than I remembered, as if the forest had been itself to bring me there faster, and the stone looked darker than before and taller. And when I stood before it, I noticed something I had missed the first time. The rock wasn't just jagged, it was carved, faint shallow lines running across its surface. Like etchings worn smooth with age, they weren't letters, not English, not any language I knew, more like symbols stacked in crooked patterns. And when I traced one with my finger, the stone was cold enough to burn like ice. There dropped again, colder than winter, though it was the middle of summer and my breath rolled out thick in front of me, and the hum rose louder from the ground under my boots, until I felt it in my teeth, rattling the roots, and I saw something, then movement between the trees, just at the edge of sight, shapes slipping quick and then never showing their faces, but circling like wolves, and I knew they were watching the same way they had watched the 10-year Zagoi stayed too long staring at the tooth. When I finally turned to leave, the trail behind me was gone, not overgrown, not blocked, just gone as if it had never existed. In its place was a slope leading down into the hollow darker than midnight, with the hum rolling up out of it like a tide, and I stumbled, because the ground shook not like an earthquake, but like something underneath was shifting, breathing, rolling over in its sleep. I thought if it wakes fully, the whole ridge would split in half. I don't remember climbing out. I just remember waking on the gravel beside my truck with dirt under my nails, and the taste of blood in my mouth as if I'd bitten my tongue raw, and the sun already high in the sky burning hot on my skin. And when I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, my eyes didn't look right, not at first. They looked darker, glossier, like something else was staring back through them, and only after I blinked hard did they go back to normally. Drove back to Charleston in a haze, thinking I had escaped. But that night when I showered, I saw something carved faintly into the skin of my forearm, thin lines, pale and shallow, not cuts, not scratches, but markings like the ones on the tooth, and when I rubbed at them, they didn't fade. I realized they weren't on my skin, they were under it, rising like something written into the bone itself. He told no one, not my girlfriend, not my co-workers, but people noticed, they noticed. I was quieter, they noticed. I looked tired, they noticed. I sometimes whispered back, but no one had spoken, and the truth was I wasn't answering them. I was answering the hum, because now it followed me everywhere, not just in the forest, but in the grocery aisles, in the bathroom mirror, in the silence before sleep. It was always there, and sometimes I felt it sensing with my pulse until I couldn't tell which was mine and which was its. And one night I heard a voice slip through the hum clear as anything. It said my name low and slow, dragging every syllable out like it had been practicing it for years, and I froze in my own bed because it wasn't outside, it wasn't in my ears, it was inside me, rolling out from my chest like a second voice. that had been waiting for the right moment to speak, and when I whispered back, without meaning to, the words didn't feel like mine. They felt like they belonged to the forest and the tooth and whatever waited in the hollow beneath. The markings spread slow across my skin like frost creeping over glass, starting faint on the forearm, then curling toward the elbow, then up the shoulder, always pale and shallow, never bleeding, never scabbing, yet somehow alive, because sometimes I could feel them twitch like a muscle I couldn't control, and when I traced them with my fingers, they thrummed faint like the low vibration of a power line, and each night the hum grew clearer, like the marks themselves were tuning me to eat at. Work, I caught myself staring too long at reflections in freezer doors or puddles on the floor, and more than once I swore I was back staring through the glass wide and waiting for me to notice, and the longer I looked, the more I felt like I was looking at something older than mountains, something using my own reflection as a window, and I would stagger away before anyone saw me standing there frozen like a fool, whispering to myself. Cody came back into my life, around then out. Nowhere he called me after years of silence, said he had been dreaming too, said he couldn't shake the forest either, and his voice sounded rougher, like he hadn't slept in weeks, and he asked me if I had gone back, and I lied at first, said nobody knew he knew because his breath hitched, and he said he had gone back too, and he had seen the symbols, and he had felt the cold. And he couldn't stop thinking about the tooth either. When he said that, I felt the hum rise in my chest, like it was pleased we were speaking its name aloud again, and met at a little diner outside Elkins, halfway between our towns, and the moment he walked in, I saw it on him, the faint lines curling just under his skin at the base of his neck rising. When he turned his head and his eyes were darker, same as mine, and when our gazes met, it was like looking into a mirror, not just in the way friends resemble each other over time, but in the way two people share the same infection, the same sickness. Growing quietly in city over coffee gone cold, we barely spoke about anything normal. It was all the forest, all the tooth, and how it followed us back, and how the hum never stopped. How sometimes it spoke clearer now in words, not just a drone, and both of us admitted we had answered back, and when we said that aloud, the lights above the booth flickered once, twice, like a shiver running through the building, and every head in the diner turned toward us, though nobody spoke and nobody kept looking. For long he leaned close and whispered that he had read old stories in a library archive about settlers who vanished in the Monongahela valleys, and how the Shawnee avoided certain ridges, saying they belonged to something that lived beneath stone. Not animal, not spirit, but something older that breathed through the earth itself. And he said the split tooth might be a marker, not a natural formation, but a signpost carved long before white men set foot there, maybe even before the tribes themselves came through. And when he said that, I felt my veins go cold, because the markings on my arm burned like they were agreeing with him. We swore to each other we wouldn't go back. We swore it hard. We shook on it like kids swearing blood. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I felt the hum rattle against my ribs, angry like a chain pulled taut. I saw Cody flinch too, and I knew then the promise was useless, because the forest didn't care. What we swore it had already claimed used night. Back in my apartment, I dreamed I was standing at the edge of the hollow, where where the trail should have been, but instead of trees, the ground opened wide, like a throat swallowing down light, and inside I saw shapes rising slow and tall, faceless but with eyes glistening, wet stone eyes, hundreds of them turning upward to meet mine. And the hum became a roar, shaking the dirt from the roots, and the trees bent low, as if bowing to something that was climbing out, and I woke to find my arm bleeding, though the markings had never broken skin before. And the blood was black, not red thick, as Tari called Cody in the morning, but he didn't answer. When I drove to his apartment, the door was locked tight, but I could hear the hum inside louder than I had ever heard it before, and the smell too like damp earth and rot rolling under the crack. I banged until the neighbors threatened to call the cops, but no one opened the door. I never saw Cody again, not there, not anywhere, and every time I ask around, it's like he's been erased, like he never rented that place, never lived in town at all, but I know he's not gone, not really, because some nights, when I walk past windows or catch my reflection too long, I see him standing behind me just for a blink, his eyes dark as skin carved with those pale rising lines. And sometimes when the hum speaks in that low, slow voice, I swear it's using his breath to shape the words, and the worst part is I feel no fear anymore, only hunger. The same hunger I felt in the forest, the same hunger rolling up from the hollow. I know it's only a matter of time before I go back, because once the split tooth marks you, you're never free, you're only borrowed. My name isn't important, but I worked 20 years as a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest. If you've hiked those trails, you might have crossed paths with me once or twice, though you wouldn't remember me and I wouldn't remember you, because the woods take most of what you carry into them, and they give back very little. Except scars. For years I logged missing persons reports, and the pattern was always the same. Young men, mostly some women too, they came for camping or fishing. Just a cheap thrill, and they stepped off the marked path onto something older and quieter. And they never came back, and we'd file the paperwork, and the deputies would search, and the dogs would circle and whine, but never point, because there was nothing to point to, only silence. So there's a place near North Fork Mountain. The maps don't line up where the logging records cut short back. In the early 1900s, like the company pulled out overnight and no one wrote down why, and the few old-timers who remember call it split tooth, and when they say it, they lower their voices like they're saying a prayer backwards. I've been there 3 times in my career, and each time I swore it would be the last. The first time was with a search party looking for a college kid from Morgantown who wandered off trail with a cheap compass and a borrowed tent. We found his camp near a tall crooked stone that looked like a broken jaw, and the air around it was wrong colder than the snow line, though it was July, and our radios fizzed and popped until the batteries drained. And the dogs wouldn't step closer no matter how hard we pulled, and we never found the boy. Not a boot, not a scrap, not even a thread. Second time I went alone, not on duty, just to see if my memory had twisted it. And the stone was still there, taller than a man, darker than midnight. Markings cut shallow across its face. Not words, not letters, but something older, and the moment I touched it, I felt it through my hand, up my arm, into my teeth, and I turned and ran without shame, because I knew if I stayed a second longer, I would not come back third time. was after dark in October when the leaves lay thick and wet and a call came in from a hunter who swore he heard voices down a ravine near the tooth. The deputies didn't want to hike it, so I went and the fog was so heavy. My beam barely lit 5 feet ahead, and the deeper I went, the more the ground shook like something shifting underneath, and then I heard it, the hum, not loud, not clear, but steady like a pulse coming from the hollow, and I swear to God the trees were leaning inward. As if poised at night, I saw shapes moving in the fog, then tall, not men, not animals. No faces, only eyes wet and dark like river stone, catching what little light I carried. The hunter who made the call was never seen again, though I found his rifle leaning against a tree, but the barrel sunk deep in the dirt as if pressed there by a heavy hand. After that I filed my reports clean, and simple hiker lost search inconclusive, case closed, but I knew better, and I started keeping my own notes at home. Old maps, copies of logging record stories passed down by the Shawnee about ridges to be avoided, and the more I read, the more I knew the tooth was not just a stone. It was a marker, and beneath it was something not meant to be woken, something that breathed slow through the earth and called back anything foolish enough to step near, and I began to notice a pattern in the ones who vanished. The few who came back did not come back whole. They were quieter, they were paler, they carried marks under the skin, like frost rising in patterns, and some of them disappeared again within months, as if the woods had come to collect what it was owed. And one of those names kept circling back to me, a young man from Charleston who worked nights in a grocery store, last seen meeting with a friend at a diner outside Elkins, and gone without a trace. They never met him face to face, but I saw his name on a list. When I laid the report side by side, I felt the hair rise on my arms, because the description matched others before him, the same age, the same dark eyes, the same markings, like something was choosing them, plucking them out of the world one by one, marking them as its own. And sometimes when I sit alone at my desk late at night, with the wind pushing against the shutters, I hear the hum, not from the forest outside, but from under my own floorboard, steady, low, rattling my teeth the same way it did when I touch the tooth. And I know that sooner or later it will call me back to, because no one who has stood before that stone ever leaves clean. We all carry it inside, waiting for the moment it decides to claim the rest. I stopped pretending I was normal around the time Cody disappeared, because it got harder each day to wear the mask, harder to look people in the eye without them catching the shadow that followed me, and harder to keep the hum quiet when it rose from my chest like a second heartbeat, louder than anything around me. My girlfriend left, not with a fight, not with shouting. Just one morning she looked at me across the kitchen table, and her face went pale like she was staring at a stranger she didn't know, and she set her coffee down without a word, packed her bags, and drove off before I even thought to stop her. And I couldn't blame her, because I had seen the same thing in the mirror 100 times before, something moving behind my eyes, something waiting for the right moment to show itself, markings that spread further. I then curling down my ribs across my back, rising like roots under the skin, faint and pale, but alive, twitching when the hum grew stronger. And sometimes I woke to find them wet, not with blood, but with some black slick film, like sap that seeped out and vanished before morning, leaving only the faintest smell of damp earthwork. Didn't last long. Either I'd catch myself zoning out in the aisles, standing still while the hum filled my skull and customers would edge around me like I was a broken display. And one night the manager found me crouched in the stock room, tracing symbols into the concrete floor with my finger over and over until my nail cracked and bled. And after that they told me not to come back. You should have felt fear or anger or shame, but instead I felt lighter, freer, like each tie to the normal world was cut clean, and the only tether left was the one pulling me north toward the forest. And I began to drive out there more often, not all the way, not yet, but close enough to smell the pine and feel the cool breath rolling out from the hollow. And each time it grew harder to turn back. All night I couldn't resist. I drove into the lot and killed the engine, and the hum rose so strong it rattled the glass. I stepped out barefoot without realizing I had left my boots behind, and the gravel cut my feet. But I didn't bleed, and I followed the path without a light because the forest itself was glowing. Faint silver like moonlight bent low across the trees, guiding me forward. And when I reached the split tooth, it was taller than ever, so tall. The top vanished into the dark canopy, and the markings across its face glistened wet like fresh carvings, though they had been there longer than memory. I pressed my hand to the stone, and it opened not with hinges, not with cracks, but with a shift like the world itself leaned, and the ground behind it slid away, revealing the hollow, not narrow this time, not hidden, but wide and yawning like a throat, ready to swallow me whole. And the hum roared out, shaking leaves from the branches. I felt the markings on my body flare hot as if answering back inside. The hollow, the ground sloped down smooth and wet like polished stone, and the air was cold enough to burn each breath, and the deeper I went, the more the forest sounds above vanished until there was only the hum and the drip of water echoing far below, and walls lined with shapes, not carvings, not drawings, but figures pressed into the stone, tall, thin arms folded, eyes shut, and mouths sealed like they were waiting to be called awake. Don't know how long I wandered down that the hum slowed. Time stretched, it bent it until minutes felt like hours and hours felt like seconds. And when I came to the bottom, I saw water black and still like glass, stretching further than my light could reach, and on the surface floated eyes. Dozens of them, hundreds all wide and wet like stone, staring upward. Without lids, without faces attached, only eyes waiting. And when they turned to me, I felt the markings on my body open, split wide, and pour black sap into the water. The surface rippled once, and something beneath shifted large enough to shake the ground under my feet. Though I could not see its shape, I felt its size, endless, sprawling beneath the mountains. Breathing slow like the earth itself was its chest, and when its breath rolled out, the water rose toward me, and the eyes blinked all at once in unison. I woke outside the hollow on my back under the split tooth, with the sun high and my skin dry, though the markings were darker, sharper, more defined, and my mouth tasted like iron and earth, and my hands were stained black as if I had been digging in soil all night. I laughed not because it was funny, but because I understood now the tooth was not just a marker. It was a door, and the thing inside had shown me a glimpse, itself a gift or a warning I didn't know. Since that night the hum has not left me once. Now for a second it fills every silence, every pause between words, every space between breaths. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I feel myself still walking. The hollow still standing at the edge of that black water, waiting for the moment the surface breaks. And what sleeps beneath finally rises. When the calls started stacking higher than usual, I knew something was different. It wasn't just one hiker gone or a hunter late coming home. It was 3 campers vanishing in the same week. Then a man whose truck was found idling empty at the North Fork lot, and then a waitress from Elkins who swore she saw a boy she used to know walk past her booth with eyes black as coal only to fade like smoke. Before she could follow, we dug through the files again, the old missing cases stacked in boxes no one cared to open. I saw the same shape repeating across decades, names vanishing, addresses gone, but always tied to that same ridge, that same crooked stone. And when I laid them in order, it looked less like accidents and more like a slow harvest, picking people out year after year. Like apples off a tree, a name caught me more than the rest. The boy from Charleston, grocery clerk, the one who met his friend at a diner and then disappeared. His case was thin, but there were whispers from other reports. A girlfriend who claimed he was different before he left, markings on his skin like frost under the surface. A manager who said he stared into freezer doors too long, like he was waiting for something to look back. And when I traced the dates, I saw his line ended the night 3 campers vanished together, as if he was tied to their loss like a rope connecting them. He drove out to the tooth. Against my better judgment, I told no one because I knew the deputies wouldn't follow. They never did, and the deeper I went, the more the forest felt wrong, not just silent, but listening the way a church listens when you step inside with dirty boots and no prayer in your chest. And when I reached the clearing, the stone rose higher than I remembered, its markings glistening faint in the moonlight, and the ground colder than frost in late summer. There was something else this time. Footprints circling the tooth, barefoot, deep pressed into the soil, darker than dirt, as if whoever walked left no blood and no mud, only a shadow burned into the ground. When I crouched to study them, the hum rose low enough to rattle the marrow in my teeth. I saw words cut into the bark of the nearest tree, not carved by knife, not by hand, but by something sharp and deliberate, lines curling into the same patterns I had seen on the stone, repeating again and again like a chant. He turned my light off and stood still listening, and that's when I saw him standing at the edge of the clearing, tall, thin, his skin pale as if the blood had drained out, his eyes darker than shadow and glowing faint in the low light, and the markings ran across his arms and chest like vines curling alive. And though he was 30 yards away, I knew it was the boy from Charleston, the one I had seen in the files, and he knew me too, because he raised a hand slow and steady, not waving, not greeting, just acknowledging like a hunter might when he sees another man step into his woods. He called out his name and he tilted his head, and the hum rose higher like it was answering for him. And before I could take a step, he was gone, not walk, not run, but gone like a candle flame snuffed by wind, leaving only the footprints pressed into the soil, leading straight toward the hollow behind the tooth. He didn't follow, because I knew the door was open, and I knew if I stepped inside it would not let me go. I stood there until the sun cracked the horizon and the stone looked smaller, weaker, like a trick of the night, but the prints were still there leading down into shadow. And the hum never stopped even in daylight, faint under the birdsong, faint under the rustle of leaves, faint but steady like a second pulse under the skin of the earth. Back at my cabin, I locked the notes away and sat in the dark listening. I realized the hum wasn't only in the forest anymore, it was under my own floorboards, filling the windows in their frames, and sometimes when the light flickered, I swore I saw eyes staring through the glass, wide, wet, dark as river stone. I thought about the boy and how he looked at me without anger, without fear, only hunger. I knew he wasn't lost, he wasn't missing, he had been claimed, and the forest wasn't just taking anymore, it was making. I do not dream anymore because the hum is louder than dreams. It fills the space where sleep used to live. It moves through my ribs and down my spine, and when I close my eyes, I see only the hollow, the black water, the eyes drifting endless across the surface, waiting for me to step in. He thought I was afraid once, but fear was only the skin that peeled away. Fear was a husk, and beneath it was hunger, and now I understand why the tooth called me back again and again. It was never asking, it was never offering, it was claiming me, shaping me to carry its voice further than the ridges and valleys. When I walk among people, I feel them stiffen. Before I speak, they sense it before they know it. They look at my face and flinch, though I smile. They see the markings, though I hide them under sleeves and jackets. They hear the hum, though no one else acknowledges it, and I realize now the forest breathes through me. I am a door walking, I am the hollow stretched into skinny past mirrors, and I see. Then myself, I see shapes tall and thin standing behind me. Their eyes wet, their mouths closed, their arms folded, and I know they are waiting for me to bring more through. Because the tooth is not just a marker and not just a door, it is a seed. I am the soil that kisses sometimes. The hunger grows sharp like claws in my belly. I wander the streets at night, following the faintest trace of someone lost, someone whose life is cracks where the hum can slip in, and when I find them I do not speak. I only stand still long enough for them to notice me, long enough for their breath to stutter and their eyes to widen, and then I step away. But I know the forest has already heard their name whispered into the dark, and sooner or later it will take them. He have seen the ranger, I know his face, I know he followed me to the clearing. I watched him clutch his light and whisper my name as if it still belonged to me. I raised my hand, not in greeting but in promise, because I could feel the hum reaching for him too, and I knew it would not be long before he joined me in the hollow. The markings on my skin are no longer shallow, they rise higher each day, curling like branches sprouting across my chest and down my legs, and when I press my hand against stone or wood or glass, they leave impressions behind, pale faint lines that spread slowly like frost, and I know those lines are not mine alone. They are roots pushing outward, looking for more. When I return to the hollow, the last time the water stirred deeper than before, and I saw something moving beneath the surface. Not one thing, but many tall, thin shapes uncoiling like ropes, rising slowly. And when their eyes opened, the hum surged so strong it cracked stone above me, and I felt my own mouth open, though I made no choice, and the sound poured out low and long, carrying not my words, but the words of the thing beneath, and the stone walls shuddered, as if answering back, you do not remember leaving, I only remember standing in town again with mud dried on my bare feet and black water dripping from my hands. Though no one else saw it, and in every window I passed, eyes blinked once in unison, as if the whole street was reflecting the how I am not lost I am. Not missing I am becoming, and the tooth is not just a place on a map, it is a mouth. And mouths must open, mouths must feed, and mouths must speak, and I am its voice now. Walking, carrying the hollow with me wherever I go. I told myself I would never go back. But men like me lie to ourselves better than we lie to anyone else, and the truth was already half gone the moment I saw him standing at the tooth pail. And marked with eyes darker than stone, I carried that image back to my cabin, and every night after I heard the hum louder under my floorboards. In every dream I woke shaking with the taste of earth in my mouth. He tried to fight it. I poured whiskey until I passed out cold. I played the radio until the batteries died. I burned sage an old woman gave me years back. And none of it worked. The hum rolled under it all, steady as breath, steady as a second heartbeat. And one night when the wind shook the shutters and the glass rattled in the frames, I felt the floor shift under my boots like something moving beneath the soil. I knew the forest wasn't asking anymore, it was calling, and sooner or later. A woodlands where he drove out before dawn, no call on the radio, no note left behind, just me and my pack and the trail waiting. The mist rolled low, thick enough to swallow the headlights. When I cut the engine, the silence pressed hard against my ears until the hum rose again, faint. At first, then stronger, guiding my steps down the ridge and into the clearing. Where the tooth stood taller than I remembered, sharper, its edges glistening, wet with dew that smelled of iron. Footprints were there again, pressed deep into the soil barefoot, and leading straight to the hollow. And though every part of me screamed to turn back, my legs kept moving like a mule dragged by its lead. I stood before the stone and laid my hand against it, and the cold ripped through me, so sharp I nearly dropped, and then the ground shifted slow like breath, and the hollow opened wide, a throat yawning black and endless. The hum roared out so strong I had to bite my tongue to keep from crying out. With Edie stepped inside, and the air burned colder than ice, each breath frosting the beam of my light, and the walls rose smooth and slick, lined with faint shapes pressed into the stone. Tall, thin arms folded, eyes shut, mouths sealed, and I knew they were not carvings. They were bodies long buried, standing still, waiting for the call, and when my being slid across them, some twitched faint as if stirring in sleep. Path led down steeper and wetter, the stone underfoot slick as river rock, and the hum rattled the air until my teeth chattered, and at the bottom I found it, the water black and still stretching further than sight, and floating upon it, eyes wide and wet, glistening like polished stone, turning in unison to stare straight at me, froze. Because the water rippled, though no wind touched it, and something stirred beneath, something vast that rolled like mountains, turning slow, and I knew then that every story, every whisper was true, and worse than true, because this was not just a thing sleeping, it was a thing dreaming. His dream was leaking out through the tooth into the world he should have run. I should have scrambled back up the path and never looked behind. But my legs locked and my breath caught, and I felt the hum surge through me until my chest ached, and my tongue moved without my will, and I spoke words that were not mine, words in no language I knew, curling out into the hollow deep, deep and low. When the sound left me, the eyes on the water blinked all at once as if answering back. Ground shuddered, the water broke, and something rose tall and thin. From the surface, faceless arms hanging long, eyes open wide and dark, and when it stepped forward, the water did not ripple, it walked as if the surface held it like stone. It stopped before me, towering, its eyes level with mine, and though it made no mouth, its voice filled my skull, low, steady, the same hum, but clearer, speaking one word again. And again, not in my ears, but inside my chest. Comey staggered back, and the beam of my light flickered and died, and for one long breath I thought it would take me then and there swallow me into the water and drown me in its dream. But the hum lowered, the ground steadied, and the hollow went still. I realized it had not taken me, because it did not need to. It had marked me, it had breathed into me, and from now on I would carry it wherever I went. When I found myself outside again, the sun was rising weak through the fog, and the tooth stood silent, cold, taller than ever. And my pack was gone, my light was gone, my radio was gone, and carved into the inside of my wrist were the markings, faint, pale, curling lines. The same as his, the boy from Charleston. The same as all the others before me drove home with shaking hands. Every mile the hum grew fainter until I thought maybe I had left it behind, but when I stepped into my cabin, the air was thick with it. The glasses rattling in the cupboards, the boards creaking like a heartbeat, and I knew then that the hollow was not behind me, it was inside me, and sooner or later it would open wide. The days after I came back were not days at all, more like pieces of a single long night that never broke. The sky brightened, the clock ticked, but everything tasted the same damp earth. And the hum never left, only softened and rose like a tide. When I tried to sleep, it filled my chest until I dreamed with my eyes open. At first I thought I could hide it. I kept wearing my uniform. I drove the same patrol routes. I answered the same calls, but folks noticed. They noticed quick. Their eyes slid away when I spoke, and their voices stuttered when they asked simple questions. One old hunter who'd known me 20 years said my shadow looked wrong, stretched long and thin, even at noon, and when I glanced down I saw he was right. It reached further than it should, as if it wanted to slip ahead of me into the trees. The markings came next, rising pale under the skin across my arms and ribs, curling like roots. Pressing through dirt, they didn't hurt, not in the way a cut hurts, but they itched deep under the bone like something growing slow and patient. In some mornings, when I washed my face, I saw faint lines reflected on my cheek, though the skin felt smooth as glass, and the water in the sink swirled darker than cleary. Tried to tell myself it was sickness or stress or madness, but I knew better. I knew the two that breathed into me, and now I carried it with me. Every step, every word, and every breath, and once you carry it, there is no setting it down, no turning. When Oaktree started hearing voices inside the hum, not just one, not just mine, but many low, and drawn out like a chorus rising from the hollow, each syllable heavy as stone. And though I could not understand the words, my body did, my veins drummed. With them my teeth ached, with them my blood moved in rhythm, and when I answered without meaning, to the markings flared bright under the skin, as if pleased it grew harder to walk among people, because their fear was thick and sharp, and the hunger in me stirred each time I caught it on their faces. The hollow wanted them, it wanted all of them. I was its doorway, and I knew if I lingered too long I would open and they would pour through, and the world would never close again, so I stayed. Alone most nights, sitting in my cabin, listening to the hum roll steady through the floorboards. And sometimes when the fire burned low, I saw eyes wide and wet blinking from the shadows. Between the logs, not reflections, not tricks, but watching and waiting. And one night I woke to find the shape standing in the corner. Tall, thin arms, folded eyes, open mouths sealed, and though they did not move, I knew they were closer. When the fire deity thought of the boy from Charleston more than once, I thought of the way he looked at me across the clearing, the way he raised his hand not to greet, but to mark, and I knew we were bound, now tied by the same hunger. The same root curling under the skin, and though I never sought him, I felt him near. Sometimes in reflection, sometimes in the corner of my sight. As if the hollow used us like the hands reaching outward. The worst was when I looked in the mirror and saw not myself, but the hollow staring back, a throat of stone, a water of eyes. Darkness deeper than mountains, and when I blinked I was back in my own skin. But for a moment I knew what it wanted, not whispers, not hunger, not shadows, but to open fully, to spill out through us into the world beyond the ridges until there was no line between forest and town, between hollow and home. And I realized then that we were not victims, not prey, we were vessels carved hollow, ourselves marked, and hollow to carry something older, something endless, and the tooth was not only in the ridge, it was in us, and once it takes root, the whole earth is nothing but another mouth waiting to open. The nights bled together until I could not tell one from another, and the hum grew louder each hour, until the walls of my cabin rattled like thin tin and the firewood cracked without flame. I knew it was time, not because I wanted it, but because the hollow had decided. The hollow does not ask, it only opens. He walked out barefoot, because boots felt heavy and wrong, and the soil was soft beneath me, warmer than it should have been, as if breath moved under it, and the trees leaned over the trail, arms-long branches folding down like a tunnel guiding me forward. And I did not carry light, because the hum glowed pale enough to show the path. Each step marked faint lines, curling outward like roots into the ground. Was there already the boy from Charleston waiting where the clearing met the tooth, and his markings burned brighter than mine, curling high across his neck and cheeks? And when he turned, his eyes were no longer eyes at all, but to pools black and deep and wet. And though he did not speak, I heard him clear inside my chest. The same word, the same command, the same promise second me, and I stepped beside him, and the tooth grown low, stone against stone, splitting wider than before, until the ground shivered and the hollow yawned open, a throat unending, black and cold. And from within came the sound, not just the hum, but the chorus, countless voices rising as one, and the air grew thick enough to choke. My bones rattled, but I did not fall, because I was already there. So walked down together, our shadows stretched long on the walls, though no light followed. On each side the figures stirred, eyes opening, arms uncurling, mouths still sealed, but waiting. And when we reached the water, it was no longer still. It rolled like the surface of a great heart beating, and from it rose the shapes, tall, thin, endless, their numbers filling the dark, until I knew the hollow was not small. It was not bound to the ridge, it went on forever, and we were only the threshold. The circled us, eyes wet wide, staring through us, not at us, and the hum rose into a wail. Though no mouth opened and the boy lifted his hands and I lifted mine and the markings burned hot, as fire carving deeper across our skin and the water split down, the middle as if a door opened beneath. From that door rose something vaster, something older, something that had dreamed the mountains into being, and now dreamed of unmaking theme. It did not need form, it did not need face, it was weight, it was hunger, it was the hollow itself, and when it touched the air above the water, the world bent round it, trees above groaning stone, outside cracking sky shuddering like glass. And I felt myself tearing open from within, not in pain, but in surrender. A vessel no longer mine, spilling wide, so the chorus could pour through. The boy turned his head once, and though his mouth never moved, I heard his voice inside me, soft and slow like wind, through dry grass, saying, "We are the door now," and I understood. We were never meant to be spared, never meant to be saved. We were carved hollow, so that the forest could walk beyond itself, so that the tooth could open forever. And as the water rose and the eyes blinked and the shape stepped out into the clearing, I felt the line between us and them vanish until the night itself breathed with us, until the hum rattled every stone, every branch, every window, and every town down the mountain, until the whole valley woke as one, and I knew then the hollow was no longer hidden. It was here, and it was everywhere, and it would never close again. And I whispered without meaning to without will, without choice, "Welcome home."